Hey everybody, it's Dr. Regina. I hope all is well with you. We are talking about the last wrapping up of the end of April, which was Autism Awareness Month, as we transition into May, which is Mental Health Awareness Month. So we're going to do a couple things. First, I'm going to wrap up autism, and then I'm going to open up some things for May, and we'll talk about all the things that we're going to talk about in the month of May, including anxiety, which is one of our first examples. So first of all, for autism, just wanted to remind you that there are things that you can do to truly support families who are on the autism spectrum, and that we've talked all month long about that. There have been so many things that I have spoken about, but the number one thing, if I had to pick one thing at this moment in time, especially with the things that have happened in the recent past, the one thing that I would say is respect choices that a family decides to make. So if a family decides that they're going to homeschool their child and that they want to completely isolate their child and not have them involved in any social interactions, and that's what they want to do, lovingly respect that. You might disagree, you might want to do things differently. It may be different than everybody else is saying to do, but respect their decision. That's one of the most important ones that I would say, because you haven't lived in that family's shoes and you don't know exactly what they're dealing with. So you want to respect every family member's decision, and you want to respect every family's decision. So if they decide that they're going to do X, Y, or Z, and you believe they should do A, B, or C, or Q, R, or S, respect that decision. One of the other things, which will be one of the last things I'll say about autism until it comes back around in this month in our calendar of things that we're going to talk about, is if you are in law enforcement, if you're a first responder, if you are a physician, a provider, or anyone else that cares for families with autism, number one, learn as much as you can about that, because that is still part of our craft. If you're taking, especially if you're of the general GP variety, right? General practitioners, pediatricians, family practitioners, any first responders, you kind of got to know a little bit about everything because you're not quite sure what might happen. What I'd remind you is to make sure that you are very well versed about all the different things, all the different presentations, the way things can present. I love it when we have these months that are, such and such awareness month, because that just reminds me, okay, there's an article that I've been waiting to read about XYZ. Let me go ahead and read that. That's the month that I try to kind of really delve into and pour into. Unfortunately, there was an incident that happened in the Maryland area, in the Columbia area, in March, and didn't 100% know how to respond to that as a mother and as a healthcare provider. It was very difficult for me for both ways, but the number one way that I knew to respond was advocacy, to reach out to the people that I knew that would have the power to make changes in terms of training, um, in terms of how we present as a community, how we present as a county. Those were the people that I reached out to first, um, because I wanted to say, hey, as a parent of a child on the spectrum, I certainly think that things could have gone differently, things could have happened differently. And anytime a life is ended, any life, every life matters. But anytime a life is ended, especially by someone in the autism community, especially if it's at the hands of a first responder, um, whether it's law enforcement or it's um, something that happens with ambulance or fire and rescue, social worker, anyone that ends up being a first responder on the front line, emergency room workers. When I see it there, of course, it tugs at my heart. And I wonder, okay, how could this have been done differently? But then I also think, how can we support the first responders? Even though a first responder that pulls a trigger, again, 90% of me is, oh my gosh, the poor family, um, the person, the community. How do we help the person that was the victim? But then there is a portion of me, because I've worked on both sides. I've worked with officers. I've worked in the corrections facilities. I've worked on the side of juvenile detention facilities. So I get to hear some of the thinking on that perspective, and I get to see the training, some of the trainings. And unfortunately, or fortunately, whichever way you want to look at it, I mean, if you question my motives, look at my TED Talk, and that'll explain as much as I could possibly explain about this. But there are humans as well, and anyone that ends the life of another person on some level, I do believe that they sit with that and they think through that. I've done workman's comp for a very long time, and I've seen officers who've come into my office and they are still traumatized by things that they were involved in. Some of them have been medically retired because of their involvement in certain things that where a life was ended. So please don't think from a community perspective that certain law enforcement are just heinous people and that they don't think about it. Some of them are. Let's just, the police arose out of a version of the KKK. So trust me, there are definitely people in law enforcement, definitely some people that's their lineage and that's their roots and that's just part of who they are. And they've just not decided to change and break away from that generational trauma. But there are law enforcement officers who end up harming people um, in the line of duty, and it impacts them. Trust me on that one. I can tell you for a fact that impacts them. Our military and our paramilitary, I've seen them as well in my office, um, where they are literally haunted by some of the things that they've done. So, my message for both sides, if you're a family member and you've had someone that's as a victim, um, the therapy part, go through the therapy portion that you may need to go to. Very much support groups are huge. And I also think from the law enforcement part, fully submit and fully participate in those interviews that you need to, and investigations that you need to, so that if there is something that you could have done differently, you learn about it. You use it as a learning experience, like Oprah Winfrey said at one point, nobody has to die today because it wasn't paying, the case may be. Um, and if you've gone through an investigation, you've gone through an interview, and you realize you've done everything that you could have done, then that's where you start giving yourself grace. And I'm going to say something that I think is always controversial. I always think it's on the side of right to reach out to a family and let them know, or reach out to a community and let them know wasn't the way that I had hoped this would have gone. I would have wished it had gone another way. Right? I do believe that we did all the things right according to what we were presented with at that time. I do think that we could have done certain things maybe differently in hindsight, but I acted under the opportunity the way that I did at the time. And I wish that the person's life, hadn't ended. But there's nothing wrong with making an apology, I think, for a life. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And if you're supporting a family, particularly where someone has been lost, where there's been a loved one that's been lost, again, going and supporting that community, that's a very simple thing to do. Showing up at a community meeting or an event or a conference and learning about what you can do in your personal and professional role, those are ways you can really support people on the spectrum. And as I segue into mental health in general, just want to remind you that for the entire month of May, I'll be coming on during the week. Last week I wasn't feeling as well, so I kind of let rest be the guide and allowed other posts to just go forth. But I want you to know that during this month, for the month of May, we're going to keep it going with Monday through Friday, with me trying to come on, usually at noon, but I can't promise it's always going to be noon. But coming on to give you some information that I believe is going to be helpful from a mental health standpoint. Okay? And it's my sincere hope that this will be a blessing to you. We're going to go all the way through, for the most part, the majority of the DSM. And I'm going to kind of give it to you the way that it was given to me, by a faith-based organization. There was a calendar that basically said, this is what we'd like to hear, and this is what you can look at, and these are the things that would be of benefit to the community. So I'm going to go with that. But I want you to know, after the month is over, we're going to go back and we're going to segment it the way that I and most other mental health providers think about it. The community may say, hey, we want to hear about anxiety and depression and, borderline personality disorder, and then schizophrenia and psychosis. And then I also want to hear about bipolar. Okay, fine. We're going to go in the order that I think people want to hear about it. However, I reserve the right that when we actually post it on YouTube in the series and group them, we're going to group them the way that psychiatrists normally think about it. Okay. So let me explain how that is. We normally think about things the way that we would do an evaluation. And I'll do a mock evaluation for the ASMR therapy site. But the way I would do an evaluation is I'm thinking about, if the person says I'm not feeling so good, automatically I'm thinking about mood disorders. I'm thinking about anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder. I'm thinking for anxiety, I'm thinking about the different types. If they say I've got anxiety, then I don't like just diagnosing a person with anxiety disorder because that's so basic and that's not very well intentioned, I think, and very thoughtful. There's panic disorder. There's obsessive compulsive disorder. There is, which can go into impulse control disorders, but the way I originally was taught, there's panic disorder. There's obsessive compulsive disorder, there's social anxiety disorder, there's generalized anxiety disorder. I'm thinking about the different types of anxiety disorders. So those would all be under the mood disorders. Then if I'm thinking about things like impulse control, I might segue over to obsessive compulsive disorder because it has both an anxiety and a compulsion and an impulse portion to it. So I might be thinking about that. And if I'm thinking about other impulse control disorders, I'm thinking about trichotillomania, hair pulling, or this kind of hair pulling. So I'm thinking about that. I'm also thinking about those impulse control disorders where it's just I just have to act out in my anger, explosive intermittent explosive disorder. Those might be something I'm thinking about. Then if I'm thinking about substances, I'm thinking about all the different substance abuse, including substance induced If I am looking at psychosis, yes, I'm thinking about schizophrenia and psychosis, but I'm also thinking about those substances that can cause um, a mood disorder or thought disorder. I'm thinking about brief psychotic episodes. So these are the ways that we're taught to recognize it in a book, right? Clearly, patients don't always read the book. So we're going to go in order of the way that patients have group it so that if someone has any questions about the different types of anxiety disorders, you'll see all the different anxiety disorders. You'll see all the different anxiety disorders. Someone has a question about the different I don't know, when we start talking about disorders that are complex medical ones, we'll go over complex pain syndrome, fibromyalgia, we'll go over diabetes and some of the concerns related to that. Okay? All right. All right. So we're ready to rock and roll. You guys have a very blessed day on purpose, and I will talk to you another time. Bye.